I'm Marc Alan here on Cash 22. We'll bring in young, up-and-coming professionals and have them mentored right here on the show in a variety of different fields and professions. You were made to do amazing things with your career. So let's get started. Welcome back to Cash 22. I'm here with First Officer Jason Taylor, who's a commercial airline pilot. He's got an awesome job. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, great. So Jason, tell us what it's like to be a pilot. We'll learn more about your history and background in a little bit, but do you enjoy being a pilot in general?
In general, it's a very exciting job. There's a lot of it that's the same day to day, but on the other hand, it's always different. There's always weather, different airplane things. We deal a lot with the customers and providing a good experience for them. So there's always going to be a unique challenge every day with every flight.
Yeah, it sounds like when weather changes, that's got to be exciting, scary sometimes. Have you had any terrifying moments as a pilot?
Nothing too terrifying, but one fun experience that I like to tell is I was going into Duluth, Minnesota one time, and it was at night in the winter time. So as you can guess, it was snowing pretty heavily, and we were on an approach, which means we were flying our instruments because the weather was so bad we couldn't see out the window. And I was flying and the other pilot was kind of looking out the window trying to find the runway. And finally, just a little bit above the ground, he calls out, "Okay, I see the runway." And I looked out the window straight ahead and I didn't see it. And he said, "No, it's over here to the side." And I looked over to the side and there was the runway because the crosswinds were so strong we were almost flying sideways.
Wow, so that was pretty critical, huh?
Pretty critical, yes. So,
did the passengers have any idea that you were in that situation?
I don't think so, and it wasn't dangerous or unsafe. That's somewhat normal, but it's just one of the things you get used to.
Just with the
every
wind,
time it's going to be a little bit different.
Yeah, wow. So let's learn a little bit about how you became a pilot. Was there a time in your life that you decided, I want to be an airline pilot? Did you see a plane take off and get inspired, or what happened there?
Yes, my dad has always been into aviation, and so from a little kid I went up flying with him a few times, and so I've had that from an early background. My mom has it in her journal from when I was 6 years old that I wanted to be an airline pilot and helicopter pilot.
All right, cool.
Yes, so it's always been kind of a part there in the back of my mind that that's something I would want to do when I grew up.
And when did you take those dreams and ambitions seriously and actually say, okay, what do I need to do next to become a pilot?
It was when I was 21 years old. I lived in Alaska for a little bit, which there was airplanes everywhere up there, including even in people's backyards. There was airstrips, and after spending time up there and being around the float planes and just seeing them everywhere, that's when I really decided that this is something I want to try. And I grew up and started flying at just a small airport north of Salt Lake City and did an introduction flight for about 30 minutes to see if I liked it, and just kept going from there. Okay,
so were you in college at the time?
Yes, I was in college.
Okay, did you do this in tandems with college courses?
Yes.
Okay, so you graduated from college and as a commercial airline pilot around the same time?
Correct, yes, and I started working as an airline pilot just before I completed my bachelor degree. I did a couple semesters online so that I could work my schedule to complete it, but most of my flight training was at the same time as college.
Okay. I understand. I've actually taken flying lessons. I have about 50 hours in a small plane. I'm not a commercial pilot, but I admire those that kept going and became pilots. What are all the options somebody faces as they're looking to become a pilot? Are there dozens of flight schools in every state? What considerations should somebody have if they want to become a pilot?
That's a good question. I did most of my flight training, or all of my flight training, via civilian methods, so just kind of local airports or different flight schools. And that's a common way to go. The military is also a great option. I have a good friend who went that route, and it's worked out very well for him. But for me, it started at just, as I said, a small airport by my home, taking flight lessons from a local flight school. And so that's a common way to go.
Okay. Did you love it right away when you got in the cockpit and started flying?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Very exciting.
Okay, I've found what I want to do.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. For people that decide to go into the military, what are some of the things they should think about there? Because aren't you locked in for a certain amount of time if you go that route?
Yes, I'm not sure of the exact amount of time. I want to say it's 10 or 12 years. And so it is a big commitment, but it's great training and unique experiences for them. Good airplanes.
Yeah, I actually enrolled in college in the ROTC Air Force program to become a pilot, And they didn't talk about flying. It was mostly about sending people into battle, and I felt a little out of place, so I stopped doing that. Are there branches of the military that, if you want to become a pilot, are maybe more focused on? I mean, I assume the Air Force is the main one, but are there big differences between those?
I'm not too sure. That my friend was in the Air Force, and so I know that that certainly is a big way to go. In Alaska, I saw a lot of the Coast Guard that did a lot of flying as well. But I think each branch at least has a little bit.
Right. Okay, great. So once you start training to become a pilot, I understand you become a private pilot and then a commercial pilot. How long does all that take? What's involved?
A lot of different licenses and ratings. So as you said, you start with a private license. After that, I obtained what's called an instrument rating, and that's what allows you to fly through the clouds and through some of that worse weather that we were talking about. And you learn how to more focus just on your instruments for navigation instead of looking outside. And then commercial rating, as you said, there's also licenses for multi-engine airplanes, helicopters, seaplanes. Everything is a whole different license. And then after commercial, you can do flight instructor license and learn to train people on airplanes. And then the final one that you get is for a commercial airline pilot. It's called your air transport license. And that allows you to fly at an airline.
Okay. And are there differences between states, or is this a national
This is national
program from the FAA?
Correct.
Something like that?
Yes.
Okay. So you started at age 21, you said, taking the lessons. And when did you finish with the final certification?
I was hired with the airline just before I turned 24.
Okay.
About a week before I turned 24.
Okay. So you must have done it fairly intensive.
I did. I would
through
fly
that
a
point,
couple
so-
times a week and then spent some time over a summer flying almost every day to obtain my commercial and flight instructor licenses. So I was
Right.
staying very busy.
Okay. And it's expensive too, right?
It is.
I mean, each hour of flight costs what, like $150, something like that?
Yes, that's a good average. And commercial license takes about 250 hours to get your commercial license.
Oh, wow.
And things like
Okay.
that. So it does take a little bit.
Okay. Did you take out loans, or did you have money for that? How does that
I was
work?
also working at the same time.
Okay.
And borrowed some from family and things like that, which they've always been very supportive, which was very nice and
Okay.
very helpful. But I had worked since I was 16 as well, saving money. So
Wow.
between all of us, we were able to put a lot in.
So you had a vision and you were focused and you made it happen? Yeah, that's great. And so tell us about what it's like to get your first job. What was the first job you had actually getting paid to fly?
First job was at the Airline, which was a great experience. And once again, even after all the hours and licenses that I had, they put you through about a 2-month training course to fly the specific jet at the airline. And even when you switch airplanes within an airline, you'll go through training again. So that's a very common theme, that you're always going to be in classrooms and simulators practicing and training. And so that was kind of the big introduction.
Okay, so how long have you been with this first airline job?
About 8 years.
Oh, about 8 years. Okay.
Yes.
Have you changed planes during that time, or been on the same one?
Been on the same airplane.
Okay.
Yes.
So you know that airplane inside and out?
Yes.
All right, great. Even so, they require you to do a visual check before each flight, is that correct?
Yes, before each flight, we'll do an inspection of the entire outside of the airplane, checking everything from antennas to tires, looking for just anything unusual, lights, kind of everything, a general inspection.
Do you ever find anything unusual?
Very rarely. They have a good maintenance program, and they're constantly doing inspections as well.
Okay. I actually, when I was taking flying lessons, part of the time I was in Hawaii, and we had some engine trouble on the runway. This was in Honolulu, and it was running pretty rough, so we decided to take it to the mechanic. And 3 days later, another student took off in that same, it was a little Cessna 152, I think, and the plane crashed, and the instructor got injured and the student died.
Oh, wow.
So that was a scary moment for me, and that was probably, I think, around the time where I decided to do something else. So have you ever considered the safety, repercussions of being a pilot, or do you feel like that's a anomaly and it's really a very safe profession?
Overall, the profession is very safe, and especially the airlines. But it is a lot of responsibility as far as being a pilot, and I do take that serious each flight to do thorough inspections and to pay attention on the job, because there is so much to it.
Oh, yeah. And you seem like, a very driven, focused person, so I would feel comfortable having you fly a plane, definitely. Are there other aspects of the job that were unexpected when you decided to become a pilot? Like, did you have a vision of what it would be like, and now that you are 8 years into a professional career, maybe are a little different than you had anticipated?
I think the schedule was a little surprising. Obviously, I knew there would be a lot of traveling. We do a lot of flights throughout each day, especially when you're on some of the smaller airlines, the smaller airplanes. And so there's definitely busy days. But they also have, rest rules that have been put in by the FAA and government to help protect us. We have certain amounts that we can work, and then we are required to have rest after that. And so there's a lot of protections built in. But it is interesting to be gone for 3 or 4 days at a time.
Okay. And you usually fly in the Midwest, East Coast region, is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Do you have any favorite places you like to fly to? Imagine all the airports are different. And
every place is a little bit different. It's fun to see some of the places on the East Coast, Maine, Vermont, things like that, just because of the beautiful scenery.
Right. Does your schedule change frequently, or do you know each week what your schedule will look like?
Generally at the airlines, you'll get your schedule a month at a time. So about the middle of 1 month, you'll get your schedule for the next month.
Okay.
And
so it's hard to make long-term plans then.
It is,
right?
Yes. There's a computer system that you can put in and request, if you want certain days off or if you want to go certain places. And then the computer kind of builds a schedule based off seniority and gives it to you. So you'll have a couple weeks notice.
Okay. And you'd mentioned flying multiple times a day at different times of the day. Do you ever feel a lot of fatigue being a pilot?
Fortunately, the rest rules really do help us and protect us from that. If ever we don't feel that we're awake or alert enough, then we can certainly call in and they'll have someone else fly the airplane because safety is the most important thing. But it is nice. They actually changed the rules about 2 years ago.
Okay, give you a little more
to give
rest.
us a little more.
All right. Well, that makes us feel comfortable as passengers, definitely.
Yes.
And you're a first officer, correct? What's the difference between a first officer and a captain of an airline?
At the airline, the captain is the final authority, and he has the final say for what happens and is really ultimately in charge of the flight. But we certainly work together on most duties and are always coordinating back and forth. As far as duties each flight, we'll usually kind of alternate who does what. So if we're together for 3 or 4 days, or even just for 1 day, if we have multiple flights, maybe he'll fly the first flight, and I'll talk to the air traffic control on the radios. I'll do some of the navigation and fuel and monitoring and things like that. And then the next flight will switch, and I'll fly, and he'll do those other duties.
Okay. Do you have any favorite parts of flying? Like, do you like taking off the best, landing? Like, what's the most fun part?
The landing is definitely the most fun part.
Okay.
The flight can be rough, but if we have a nice, safe landing at the end, or soft and it feels nice, then that's what we like.
Yeah, nice and smooth.
Yes.
Do you ever hear the passengers in the plane clap if there's a really smooth landing?
I wish.
I wish, yeah. And you get to talk over the PA system too, right?
Yes.
Is that pretty fun?
It is fun.
Okay.
Yes, we keep them updated with the weather and simple things like that, but it's fun to be able to communicate with them.
Okay.
It's a little different because you can't usually see their reactions.
Okay.
But you just hope they're listening.
Right. Are there any guidelines in terms of, every 10 minutes or every hour keep the passengers updated on where we are, things like that? Or how does that work?
Usually for a flight that leaves and is operating on time, we'll give them a update once we're up in the air. Usually that's when we'll turn the seatbelt sign off. If there is going to be calm, tell them how much flight time we have, things like that. If ever we're on the ground waiting for a flight and there's a delay for waiting or for weather or maintenance, we'll try and give them an update about every 15 minutes of when we expect to be departing.
Yeah, okay. Do you ever make jokes or anything over the...
We try and stay mostly
keep it
professional. You can do
professional.
little ones, but we'll stay
okay.
professional.
All right, that's good. So what's a typical career path look like for a pilot? You're a first officer now for this commuter airline. How does the career progress from there?
Generally, kind of like we talked about a little bit earlier, is after getting your commercial license, you'll get your flight instructor licenses. And so that's what I did, is I actually obtained 3 different flight instructor licenses. And then you'll do that to build up enough hours to be able to go to the airline. And then most people will start at what's called a commuter or regional airline, work there to gain experience, move up to captain, which is based off seniority. And then after some time as a captain, then you'll move on to the major airlines or some of the bigger cargo airlines and things like that.
Okay.
So there are many different routes. A lot of people will go and do corporate flying, fly business jets, things like that. But the very general progression is kind of flight instructor, smaller airline, and then large airline.
Okay. And what's the most desirable position as a pilot? Like if you were to say, I could be a pilot for whatever, what would that be?
To be a captain at a major airline, so
Okay.
flying kind of the big airplanes across.
Like a 747?
Exactly,
or something
going
like that?
international flights. That's always the dream.
Okay. Those are, I imagine, very hard to get, seniority-based
Yes.
positions. Okay.
Take some time, but when you get there, it's very nice.
Oh, yeah. How long does it typically take to become a captain of a large vehicle like that? or
At a
plane?
major airline, it's so hard to say because the industry kind of changes, but probably usually about 15 years to get to that.
Okay. Are there tests or checks along the way as a pilot? You know, you pass all the exams, you become a pilot, you have to get certified for each plane that you fly. Are there regular tests that you have to do?
Yes, good question. So every year we get to go back and spend a couple days in a simulator where we'll practice all of the emergencies, all the things that can go wrong that fortunately don't happen on the day-to-day basis. And we'll practice those for one day, and then the next day we'll actually operate a couple flights going from 2 different places in the simulator. Well, they'll make a few little things go wrong to see how we react, make sure we work together as a crew, and then that's kind of a pass or fail that we have to successfully complete those flights. And then we also will spend time for 3 days in a classroom. We have some online training that we'll do each year. So there's always training and checking.
Do those simulators feel very realistic? I mean, if you're good at that, are you good at flying a
They really
plane?
do. They're a lot of fun. They're full motion, hydraulic, and inside looks just like the flight deck on a real airplane. So they're actually a lot of fun to be in.
Okay. Tell me what it's like to have the identity of a pilot. You know, when you become a pilot, you wear a uniform, people see you as the pilot coming on the plane. Do you notice that people look at you differently knowing that you're the pilot?
I think so, a little bit at the airport especially. They'll see us and kind of watch what we're doing and how we're acting.
Yeah, you're kind of in the public eye there, and kids probably look up to you when they're walking on the plane.
Yes. I've gotten a few paper airplanes and pictures drawn from kids after a flight, and that's always a lot of fun to get.
That sounds like fun. If you weren't an airline pilot, like when you were looking back in age 21, whenever you started, what are some of the other professions you considered?
I never did much into it, but I was always kind of interested in the engineering field, which certainly has a lot of connections to the airline industry. I've also looked at different things as far as training and hiring that are a lot of fun. As I've gone through all of this constant training and checking in the airline, that's always been very fascinating to me to be able to teach new pilots. Like I said, I do have my flight instructor's licenses and did that, and had a lot of fun developing lesson plans and training and helping new people enter the profession. So those are some other things that are still within aviation that would be related. But
Yeah, that's great. So how could someone do a test for themselves to see if they'd be a good fit to be a pilot? Are there things such as you need to have a focus for long periods of time, you need to love aviation in general, or what are some of those questions someone should ask themselves if they're considering becoming a pilot?
that's a good question. I think really, yes, having a love for aviation and for travel is certainly a big part of it, and being able to stay focused. The interesting thing about being a pilot is generally we have a lot of work at the beginning of our day and a lot of work at the end for takeoff and landing. And then when you're up in the air on a longer flight, there's not as much going on at one time, but you still always have to remain very focused as far as monitoring your fuel and your flight path and navigation. So you do have to be able to have that self-motivation to stay focused.
Right, okay. And also I understand that pilots flying the smaller commuter airlines don't usually get paid too much money. Is that right?
You sort of work your way up through that progression. So each level, when you start out as a flight instructor, will be a little less, and then as you go to a smaller airline, it's less as a first officer, but then a captain makes more, and you go up through that progression.
Okay, and you get paid based on the weight of the airplane, is that right?
It's a little bit different at each airline. We'll have a contract that stipulates, but generally the type of airplane, whichever you're flying is how much you'll get paid.
Right.
It'll have a set rate per flight hour.
Okay. Is that because more passengers fit in the plane and makes more money for the airline?
Exactly. More passengers is more pay.
Right. That makes sense.
Yes.
Okay. Do you ever fly for fun, like little airplanes, or you do it so much for work you probably don't have time for that?
I haven't had much time recently, but I have gone up in an airplane, a small airplane, a few times since doing the commercial, and it was a lot of fun.
Okay.
Different. It's kind of interesting to go from a jet back to a small propeller airplane, but it is fun to still do that every once in a while.
Okay. And you're married, right?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So how does your wife feel about you being a pilot? Does she ever get nervous about you flying all the time?
I don't think so much for the airline, and I think she thinks it's fun.
Okay. Is the schedule difficult, having you be gone a lot with sporadic hours?
It's very different. As I said, it can be hard to be gone for 3 or 4 days when you do have a family, but then on the other side, after that, you're home for usually maybe 3 days instead of this a 2-day weekend. And so you just learn to enjoy kind of that extra time and do a lot then.
Right.
So different and unique, but it is fun.
Yeah, that's great. One of the highlights I've seen of a pilot doing something amazing is when that airline landed on the Hudson River in New York. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. How do you think that would feel to be a pilot and be in a situation where you need to make an emergency landing on a river? I always wanted to get a pilot's perspective on something like that.
It's hard to imagine, but it's one of those things you just have to always be prepared. With the early flight training, you're always kind of scoping out areas and knowing where you are. We call it situational awareness.
Okay.
But knowing where you are in relation to airports, to places that you could land, even to other aircraft, things like that. So he definitely did an incredible job of knowing exactly where he was and where he needed to go and what he needed to do to safely accomplish that.
Yeah, that's great. So I'd never really thought about, he probably already knew the emergency landing spots, you know, everywhere he's going along the path. You're constantly scanning for things like that. Yeah, that's really cool. So being a pilot now for 8 years with this commuter airline, do you like it as much as you did when you started, or how do you feel emotionally about being a pilot?
That's a good question. It certainly is a job that I've been doing a long time, but as I said, each day is still different. And so there's still always that unique, that kind of the next flight is always your most important flight. Even though I have thousands of hours and have landed an airplane thousands of times, it's still the one coming up next week that's now the most important one. So it can become routine in one sense because we're always trying to keep it standard and the same, but you're always ready for whatever can happen.
I suppose the weather variable is always there, so you never
Yes.
know. And
Yes.
yeah, that's great. We'd actually like to get somebody else here on the program that's been in the industry even longer than you, somebody maybe 20 years or a captain of a large airline, and talk about where you could go with your career, maybe some other mentoring. Would that be an interesting opportunity for you?
That'd be very interesting.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Well, we'll try to arrange that sometime in the near future and have you back here on the show. But for now, Jason, I think we're going to wrap up the conversation. And I've learned a lot about what it's like to be in your shoes and hear from you on being an airline pilot. So we appreciate you coming here and sharing that with all of us.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. So I'm Marc Alan, and we've had a great conversation here with First Officer Jason Taylor. And this is Cash 22. Thank you.